Danse Macabre. Rain pounded fiercely against the large arched window with an almost deafening roar, and the wind screamed out in agony. A giant flash, then a terrible crackle and boom. The entire castle trembled in fear. I awoke with a racing heart and sat up quickly in my bed, trying to recall the night before, and how I even made it into my bedchamber. My hand still clutched an empty bottle of fortified wine, and my head pounded as if someone was beating it profusely with an iron rod. Another bright burst filled the room, casting treacherous shadows that climbed up the walls and disappeared into the ceiling. I scratched at my coarse black beard, which constantly itched in the morning for some reason, and then wrapped my arms around myself, rubbing my hands up and down, trying to create some friction. My thin red silk bedclothes did little to protect me from the early morning chill, and I could feel small bumps on my arms underneath. I glared at my large fireplace with slanted eyes and a scowl. Its once roaring flames had dwindled to the faintest orange glow. With much reluctance, I crawled out of bed and walked barefoot across the gray stone floor. It felt like ice, but I was used to it. I had lived at Blightwood Castle all of my life. This was my 30th winter at the ancestral home of my family. I pulled a few cut logs from the neatly arranged pile that my servants refilled daily and tossed them into the pit. A black steel poker hung from a handle on the right side below the faded mahogany mantel. I slid it from its hook, poking and stirring the fire until the logs popped and snapped with bright orange flames. I held my hands out to take in the warmth, occasionally turning around to warm my backside. All of a sudden, I felt a familiar sensation in my bowels. My stomach started to twist and turn. I retched onto the floor, spewing forth what looked like large chunks of meat and corn kernels. Not being able to recall any memory of my late-night supper, I was glad to see that I had, at the very least, eaten something. Eating a full meal had become quite unusual. Ever since my wife Annabelle ran away from her betrothed duties, I presumed with another man, I had fallen heavy into the drink. On a good day, I waited until noon for my first glass of brandy. The rain seemed to slow as the faint glow of daylight peered inside. I walked back across the icy floor to the window and looked outside at the dim courtyard below. Beside a dead and decaying tree, there was a large fountain, now overflowing from the rain. In the center was a giant bronze statue made in the likeness of a skeleton. He sat upon a bench with his back slightly hunched, his right elbow sat on his left knee, and his hand was under his chin, supporting his head. He appeared to be in deep thought. The bronze had tarnished over the years, but I felt it gave the statue character. According to my long-deceased great-grandmother, it had been imported from Greece hundreds of years ago. A knock upon my bedchamber door startled me from my thoughts. The door opened slowly. The hinges wailed out in pain. A small head covered in a light blue kerchief appeared. Strands of white hair poked out through the folds. The face was an old one, but as familiar as my own. It was filled with deep-set wrinkles and brown liver spots. It was the face that had taken care of me since I was an infant, even more so than my own mother.
Begging your pardon, Lord Edward. I wasn't sure if you had awakened yet. Are you ready to break your fast?
The old woman asked with a slight shakiness in her raspy voice. Yes, Franz. I am quite famished, I said, motioning towards my foul discharge. I looked away, quickly breaking eye contact. She had been my faithful servant all my life, yet I still felt uncomfortable giving her tasks that I would sooner toss myself into a pit of vipers than do for someone else. She nodded her head in comprehension and turned to fetch the mop. Is everything ready for our guest today? I tried to ask as casually as possible to hide my excitement. I turned my attention back to the courtyard where one of my servants, a young boy of 12, carried a wagon full of freshly chopped wood through the front gate.
Almost, my lord,
replied Franz, which brought a slight smile to my pale face. I had grown quite melancholy since the departure of my previous bride, so I had taken it upon myself to write a letter to my uncle Leopold in Vienna. He was a Duke of House Babenberg and would most assuredly provide his beloved nephew with a new wife, hopefully as beautiful and charming as my Annabel. He soon wrote back his condolences for my loss. To my beloved nephew, Edward, of course I would do you this honor that would normally be reserved to your father and mother. God rest their souls. My wife and I will find you the most beautiful woman in all of Europe because you, my nephew, deserve it. She will arrive within a fortnight with love, Leopold. He stamped the bottom with his family's coat of arms, 4 golden eagles across a black shield. So it came to be that this was the very day that my betrothed would arrive. A letter had been sent to make sure all was prepared. I felt very nervous, anxious, and nauseous, but also my stomach howled at the smell of my heaping plate of food that Franz brought up to my room. I sat on top of my bed, eating my simple breakfast of ham, stale bread, and dark brown ale. After my 3rd piece of ham and 5th cup of ale, my morning sickness had abated, and my head had the loveliest spinning. I went back to the window and stared at the front gate, waiting for it to open at any instant. I obsessed over how she would look and how she would act. Would she even speak the same language as me? Did I even care if she didn't? How could she ever compare with my Annabel? She could never be as beautiful or as fair, as kind and as gentle. I wanted to cancel the whole business altogether. I didn't even really need a wife, did I? But I knew I needed sons to carry on the family name. After all, my heirs would inherit Blightwood Castle and have control of all my lands and people. I kept picturing an old gray hag with missing teeth and a crooked nose showing up at my door, and that my uncle had played the cruelest of jokes on me. I stared out for what must have been hours, pacing back and forth, glancing out all the time. I decided I would drive myself mad, so I went to lie back in bed for a small nap. As soon as I lay down and closed my eyes, the castle bell began to sound, signaling the arrival of my new guest. I ran like a wild child down the winding stairs, through the foyer, and abruptly stopped at the front door. I couldn't run out of the castle like a crazed lunatic who had never entertained company before. I steadied myself, slicking back my dark black hair as best I could, and straightened my dark blue gold-button jacket. I put my left hand behind my back, lifted my chin in the air absurdly high, and strolled out with the sort of swagger a newly crowned prince has as he walks to greet his new kingdom. The bright light of the sun half blinded me for a moment. The clouds had broken, and it seemed all the birds in the area had sprung to life. 2 servants pulled the heavy gate open, and a black carriage pulled by. 3 large horses that were as black as midnight drove through. Their hooves and legs were covered in mud, and hot steam blew from their frothy mouths. There was one man driving. His dark red jacket and white trousers looked new, and he wore a jeweled sword at his side. He jumped down from his seat and opened the carriage door, grabbing a pale, white, slender hand. My wife-to-be wore a purple gown with black borders and black lacing along the sleeves. In the middle were encrusted decorative stones on a black background that sparkled slightly in the midday sun. Around her neck hung a silver necklace with a small heart. I could immediately tell she came from wealth. The driver helped her step from the carriage onto the muddy ground.
Would you like for me to carry you, Lady Elizabeth?
The driver asked politely.
I've stepped in mud before, Alfred. I think I will be fine.
Her voice was like a sweet song. Her dark hair was slightly curled and ran down past the middle of her back. Her face was soft and fair. If angels existed, surely they would look like her.
As you wish,
Alfred replied with an expressionless face. She stepped into the mud without apprehension. Lady Elizabeth, I presume. I took her hand and kissed it, breathing in her perfumed sleeve. It smelled of sweet lilac.
You must be, Edward. Enchanté.
She smiled and bowed. "I don't mean to be hasty, Lady Elizabeth, but we should begin the ceremony." I quickly led her inside. The priest begged me not to dally. There was a terrible storm last night, and it took the roof off of the church, which is also his home. He would like to get a new one before the sun sets.
Of course. I have never been one for long engagements. An old acquaintance of mine, Celia, was engaged for over a year. Before the wedding, she was with child from a different man. The husband never even found out.
Lady Elizabeth said matter-of-factly. "Positively scandalous," I replied, surprised by her quick divulgence of gossip. I gave her a quick tour of the first 2 floors of Blightwood Castle, her soon-to-be home. Then we made our way to the back side where the gardens were. There the priest waited with a Christian Bible in hand, wearing a long red ornamented stole. He performed the rites as quickly as possible, as instructed. The whole ceremony was done in 5 minutes. We kissed briefly. Franz was the only witness. She sat on a stone bench next to the dead rose bushes and smiled when I looked her way.
It has been a long journey, husband. I am in desperate need of a bath.
Elizabeth said with a pleading look in her eyes. "I will show you the way, Lady Elizabeth."
Please call me Elizabeth. We are married now.
She grabbed my hand. "As you wish, Elizabeth." I smiled and bowed. I led her down to the basement level. The bath chamber was built over natural hot springs, which allowed for a limitless supply of hot water. The bath was huge, even by Roman standards. 30 people could have bathed comfortably. Candles that were always lit lined the walls.
What is that?
Elizabeth asked, pointing up. Shields, swords, and other various decorations lined the wall, but my favorite was a stuffed raven with his wings spread wide. That, my dear, used to be a pet of my great-grandfather's. The bird's name was Cain, and it has been said that he could speak, at least a few words, and that my great-grandfather would carry on whole conversations with him about battle and siege tactics, and that he could even play chess, I said with braggadocio.
Sounds like a most charming bird, truly. Could you help me with my dress, Edward?
Elizabeth turned her back to me. I unfastened the clasps. She slowly and provocatively slid her gown down. That's when I saw something that horrified me beyond anything I had ever experienced. On the right side of her upper back was a scar of some sort, but this was not just any ordinary scar. It resembled precisely the face of my Annabelle, her hair, her small nose, and her soft chin. It was her. It was as clear as a freshly polished window. I had no words and I couldn't move. I was frozen in fear and bewilderment. How could this be? Elizabeth stepped slowly into the steaming water. She produced a small vial of perfume and sprinkled it into the bath. The scent of jasmine enveloped the whole of the room.
Will you not join me, my love?
Elizabeth asked as she leaned back against the stone. Her breasts were exposed, calling to me, but all I could think about was the face of Annabelle upon her back, glaring at me with contempt and scorn. Elizabeth, I have to ask you something that a woman might find being of a sensitive nature.
Husband, we are married now. I am yours. Ask me anything. I will never deny you.
How came you with that scar upon your back? I asked, then bit my lip. The taste of blood flowed over my tongue. I didn't know what to expect. I thought she might laugh and tell me she was a witch, and that I was cursed, that she knew what really happened to Annabelle, something I had never whispered to another living soul. She knew I had murdered her in a tempestuous rage. Somehow she knew. I don't know how, but she had discovered my secret. But it was an accident. I didn't mean to. I wanted to run from the room, lock myself in the catacombs, and dig her body up, just to make sure she hadn't come back to haunt me. But I couldn't bring myself to look at her rotting face, the decaying flesh falling from her body. Just when I thought I would vomit for the second time that day, she answered.
On my back? Oh, it's nothing. I was riding my horse when I was 16, about 2 years ago. He got spooked by a howling wolf from miles away, and I was thrown. I landed on some sharp rocks. The pain wasn't too bad, and it healed fast. Why do you ask? You don't find me horrendous now, do you, husband?
Elizabeth said with a smile, not at all embarrassed by her slight disfigurement. Has anyone ever told you your scar resembles a face? I asked, wondering if I was talking with the ghost of Annabelle and afraid of her answer.
A face? No. Of course not, love. Come into the bath with me while the water is hot.
She held out her hand to me. Her eyes beckoned me to ravish her. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing, I told myself. Maybe it was the dim lighting of the room, a trick played on my eyes by the dancing shadows from the many candles. I quickly disrobed, took a deep draught of wine from my bottle, and collapsed into the fragrant, soothing water. Elizabeth spared no time in accosting me with violent kisses. I gave in to her seduction without hesitation, and we were as one. My hands wandered up her arms and across her shoulders, and then to her back, finding her scar. It didn't feel so bad, only a slight elevation of skin and a little hard. In the midst of our passion, I briefly forgot about the scar and the face I perhaps imagined. She breathed heavy on top of me, slightly moaning with her neck bent back. Suddenly, I felt a pain in my finger, the finger that traced the outline of her scar. It felt like something had bit it. I let out a slight grunt, which she didn't notice, and I held my finger up. Blood dripped down into the water, and there appeared to be visible bite marks. The flesh had clearly been punctured. I at once threw her from me and turned her around. There was the face again, grinning at me, blood smeared across Annabelle's mouth.
What do you want, husband? You want me to face this way?
All arousal had left my mind and my body. I knew then that this woman had been possessed by my dead wife. With all of my force, I pushed Elizabeth under the water. She yelled, struggled, and scratched, but she was no match for my strength. After a few minutes, she stopped moving and floated face down on top of the water. The face on her back grimaced at me. I grabbed my shaving razor from the edge of the bath, slicing easily into her skin, cutting around the scar, then peeling it off. I cast it into the fireplace. There was a slight hissing sound as it melted and shriveled, turning to ash. I pulled a robe from the wall and bent down to lift her body from the bath. I needed to dispose of her quickly, before any of my servants came around. Just then, a sweet, dark melody began to play from the other side of the door. I had forgotten I hired a violinist from the village to play. It was a beautiful song. It was enchanting, yet sad and full of despair. I looked down at Elizabeth, her body still warm. She looked as if she slept, but I knew she would never awaken again from this slumber. I closed my eyes. We were in a ballroom in a great palace with my uncle Leopold in Vienna. All the lords and ladies, dukes and duchesses were dressed in their best, all glittering and sparkling. They gazed at me and my new bride as we floated across the dance floor, as if our feet were made of clouds. The floor cleared as everyone moved aside to see Edward, nephew of the famed Duke Leopold, and his new bride. They smiled with bright, wide smiles of joy and nodded their heads to us. The music stopped. I was back in the bathing chamber, holding a cold, naked corpse, swaying to and fro, her bare feet dragging along the floor.